Mother Bear fought for hours to save herself from drowning. What this human boy did shocked everyone. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight in the mountains of Pine Ridge. Water rushed down the slopes and filled the normally peaceful river until it swelled beyond its banks. Mist hung in the air as the powerful current tore at everything in its path. Jacob Bennet woke to the sound of thunder. The 9-year-old boy rolled over in his bed and stared out the window of his family's cabin. Rain pattered against the glass, making it hard to see the world outside. His parents had gone into town for supplies, promising to be back before dinner. They'd told him to stay inside, to keep safe and dry, but Jacob had other plans. As the morning light grew stronger, Jacob put on his rubber boots and raincoat. He grabbed the fishing pole he had made himself from a sturdy branch and some fishing line his father had given him. The river would be too dangerous to fish in today, but there was a small protected inlet just downstream where fish often gathered during storms. His parents wouldn't be home for hours, and he was sure he could catch something impressive to surprise them with. Jacob stepped outside, the cool air filling his lungs. The cabin sat on a small hill, giving him a clear view of the swollen river below. The water looked angry today, brown with mud and debris, moving faster than he had ever seen it. Still, he wasn't afraid. He knew these woods, this river. It was his home. As he made his way down the slippery path toward his fishing spot, a strange sound reached his ears. At first, he thought it was just the roar of the water, but then he heard it again, a desperate, frightened cry. It wasn't human, but it wasn't like any animal call he had heard before either. Jacob froze, listening closely. There it was again, a high-pitched whine followed by something deeper, more guttural. He changed direction, moving carefully through the wet underbrush toward the sound. What he saw when he reached the riverbank made his heart stop. Just 20 feet away, clinging to a half-submerged log that had wedged itself against some rocks, was a large brown bear. Her fur was soaked through, making her look smaller than she probably was. Her powerful legs scraped desperately at the slippery wood as the current threatened to pull her away. On the opposite bank, 2 small cubs paced back and forth, crying out for their mother. They couldn't have been more than a few months old, too young to survive on their own. Jacob ducked behind a tree, his breathing quick and shallow. His father had taught him about bears, how dangerous they could be, especially mothers with cubs. But this mother wasn't a threat to anyone right now. She was fighting for her life. As he watched, the bear made another attempt to climb onto the bank where her cubs waited. She almost made it, her front paws digging into the mud, before the ground gave way beneath her weight. She slid back into the rushing water with a splash, barely managing to grab hold of the log again. Jacob could see the exhaustion in every move she made. How long had she been trapped like this? Hours, maybe? Her movements were becoming slower, her attempts to escape less frequent. The cubs continued to cry, confused and frightened. "She's going to drown," Jacob whispered to himself, the realization hitting him like a punch to the stomach. He knew he should run back to the cabin to wait for his parents to return. They would know what to do, or who to call. But looking at the mother bear's eyes, at the way she kept fighting despite her failing strength, Jacob knew she didn't have that kind of time. The boy's mind raced. What could he possibly do? He was just a kid, and this was a wild bear, an animal that could kill him with a single swipe of her paw if she felt threatened. But if he did nothing, 3 bears would die today, the mother to the river, and eventually the cubs to starvation or predators. That's when Jacob spotted the coil of rope hanging on a branch near the path. His father must have left it there after clearing some fallen trees last week. An idea began to form in his mind. It was dangerous, maybe even stupid, but it might be the bear's only chance. Quietly, Jacob went to retrieve the rope. It was heavy in his small hands, but he knew how to tie the knots his father had taught him. He looped one end around a sturdy oak tree near the bank, pulling it tight to make sure it would hold. Then he tied the other end around his waist, leaving enough slack to reach the water's edge. With his heart pounding in his chest, Jacob inched closer to the trapped bear. She saw him almost immediately, her eyes locking onto his small figure. A low growl rumbled from her throat, a warning despite her weakened state. "It's okay," Jacob said softly, though he knew she couldn't understand him. "I'm going to help you." The bear watched him, her dark eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and exhaustion. She didn't move to attack, perhaps too tired to see him as a threat, or maybe, just maybe, some part of her sensed his intentions. Jacob moved slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. The cubs on the far bank had gone quiet, as if they too were watching to see what this strange human would do. The rain continued to fall around them, and the river roared on, uncaring about the drama unfolding on its banks. Jacob knew that what he was about to do might be the bravest or the most foolish thing he had ever done in his young life. But as he looked at the mother bear's eyes once more, he made his decision. Some things were worth being brave for, even if it meant being a little bit foolish too. Jacob took a deep breath and unwound more of the rope from around his waist. His hands were shaking, but his mind was clear. The mother bear was watching him now, her eyes never leaving his small figure. Another attempt to climb the bank ended in failure, and this time when she slipped back, she barely managed to grab the log. Her head dipped below the water for a moment before resurfacing, and Jacob could see the panic in her movements. "Hold on," he whispered, more to himself than to the bear. "Just hold on a little longer." He had never been this close to a wild bear before. His father had pointed them out from a distance during hikes, always making sure to give them plenty of space. "Respect their territory," his father would say, "and they'll usually respect yours." But there was no territory here, just survival. The cubs had started crying again, their small bodies pressed against each other for warmth in the rain. One of them, the smaller of the two, kept trying to come down to the water's edge, only to be stopped by its sibling who seemed to sense the danger. Jacob crept closer to the edge of the bank, the rope secure around his waist. The ground was slippery with mud, and he had to dig his heels in to keep from sliding. The bear was only about 15 feet away now, and he could see every detail of her struggle. The way her powerful muscles strained against the current, the determination in her eyes even as her strength failed her. "I'm going to throw you the rope," Jacob said, his voice surprisingly steady despite his fear. "Please don't eat me." He began to fashion a loop at the end of the rope, a larger version of the rabbit snare his father had taught him to make. It needed to be big enough to go around the bear's upper body, but not so big that it would slip off. As he worked with the rope, a crack of thunder shook the sky above, and then something unexpected happened. A large branch, torn loose by the storm, came hurtling down the river. Before Jacob could even shout a warning, it slammed into the log the bear was clinging to. The impact shifted the log, spinning it in the current. The bear roared in surprise and fear, her grip slipping. For a terrible moment, Jacob thought she would be swept away. But instead, the new position of the log actually pushed her closer to the bank where Jacob stood, not the side with her cubs but his side. This changed everything. Now, instead of trying to throw the rope across the river, he might be able to reach her directly, but it also meant that if she did make it to shore, he would be standing just feet away from a frightened, exhausted wild animal, a mother separated from her young. Jacob swallowed hard. The bear was now less than 10 feet from the bank, but the current was still too strong for her to swim against. She kept trying to move upstream toward her cubs, but the river pushed her back every time. Then Jacob noticed something else, a red stain spreading in the water around the bear. She was injured, probably from being thrown against rocks or debris in the river. That explained why she seemed to be getting weaker by the minute. If he didn't act now, she wouldn't survive much longer. Making a split-second decision, Jacob anchored his end of the rope more securely around the tree trunk, then stepped closer to the edge. The bank here jutted out slightly over the water, creating a small overhang if he could just reach far enough. "Please, work," he whispered, then called out louder to the bear, "Hey! Over here!" The bear's head turned toward him, her eyes finding his. There was something in that gaze, something beyond the simple fear of a trapped animal. It was almost like recognition, an awareness that transcended the divide between their species. Jacob stretched out with the loop of rope, leaning as far as he dared over the rushing water. "Come on," he urged, "you can do it." As if understanding his words, the bear made one more desperate attempt to swim toward him. Her powerful legs churned against the current, moving her inch by inch closer to the bank. Jacob leaned out further, the rope around his waist now pulled taut. His boots slipped on the mud, and for a heart-stopping moment he thought he would fall into the raging river himself. But he caught himself just in time, digging his heels into the softer ground. "Almost there," he encouraged, stretching the loop toward the bear. Then, in a sudden surge of determination, the bear lunged forward. Her front paws reached the underwater part of the bank, finding purchase in the mud. She pulled herself forward with the last of her strength, close enough that Jacob could see the individual droplets of water clinging to her fur. This was his chance. With a flick of his wrist, he dropped the loop over her head and shoulders. The bear flinched, but didn't retreat. Instead, she seemed to understand that this strange tether was her lifeline. "I've got you," Jacob said, beginning to pull on the rope while keeping his distance. "Just a little more." The bear struggled up the slippery bank, using the gentle tension of the rope to help guide her. Jacob kept backing up, maintaining the pressure on the line while making sure to stay out of her direct path. With a final heave, the mother bear pulled herself fully onto solid ground. She collapsed immediately, her sides heaving with exhaustion. The rope was still looped around her upper body, but Jacob didn't dare approach to remove it. For a long moment, neither moved. The bear lay on her side, her eyes half closed, breath coming in ragged gasps. Jacob stood frozen, the distance between them less than the length of a small car. He could see now that there was a deep gash in her right hind leg, the source of the blood in the water. Across the river, the cubs continued to cry for their mother. The sound seemed to revive her somewhat, and she lifted her massive head to look toward them, then back at Jacob. What happened next would stay with Jacob for the rest of his life. The bear slowly, painfully rose to her feet. Jacob tensed, ready to run if necessary, his hand still holding the rope, though he knew it would offer little protection if she charged. But she didn't charge. Instead, she shook herself, sending water spraying in all directions, then looked directly into Jacob's eyes. There was no aggression in her gaze, no wild fear. There was only a steady, intelligent awareness. She took a step toward him, and Jacob's heart nearly stopped. Then she stopped, lowered her head slightly, and made a soft, huffing sound. Was it a thank you, a warning? Jacob couldn't tell. All he knew was that she could have attacked him easily, but chose not to. After a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the bear turned away from him. She limped toward the water's edge, looking across at her cubs who were now jumping with excitement at the sight of their mother. But there was a problem. The river that had nearly claimed her life still separated her from her young. It was too dangerous for her to attempt another crossing, especially in her weakened state. The cubs couldn't swim across either. They would be swept away instantly. Jacob watched as the mother bear paced anxiously along the bank, looking for a way to reach her cubs. He could see the distress building in her movements, in the way she kept looking back and forth between the water and her young. And that's when Jacob realized his rescue was only half complete. He had saved the mother, but now she needed to be reunited with her cubs. Otherwise, what was the point? A new determination filled him. He would have to find a way to help her cross the river safely, or bring the cubs to her. But how? The nearest bridge was miles away, and he had no boat or other way to cross the raging water. As he stood there, trying to think of a solution, he heard something that made his blood run cold, the deep, throaty growl of another bear, and it was coming from the direction of the cubs. Jacob squinted through the rain, trying to make out what was happening on the far bank. A dark shape moved between the trees. Another bear, larger than the mother. A male, most likely. In normal circumstances, male bears were known to kill cubs that weren't their own. This was not just a problem of separation now. It was a race against time. The mother bear heard it too. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with what could only be described as terror. She let out a roar that shook Jacob to his core, a sound of rage, fear, and desperation all mixed together. She rushed to the water's edge, preparing to plunge back into the deadly current. "No!" Jacob shouted. "You'll drown!" To his amazement, the bear hesitated, as if actually listening to him. She looked back, her eyes finding his again with that same eerie intelligence. Then she looked at the river, at her cubs, and at the approaching male bear. She seemed to be weighing impossible choices. Jacob's mind raced. The rope. The rope was still partly looped around the mother bear. The other end was tied to the tree. If he could somehow secure the rope on the other side as well, create a kind of guideline across the river. But how? He couldn't cross the river himself. It was too dangerous, too powerful. He needed help. That's when Jacob remembered the shortwave radio in the cabin. His father kept it for emergencies, to call for help when the regular phone lines were down, like they probably were now after 3 days of storms. Maybe he could call someone. A forest ranger, emergency services, anyone. "Stay here," he told the bear, feeling ridiculous even as he said it. But to his continued amazement, she seemed to understand something of his intent. She stopped her frantic pacing, watching as he started to back away. "I'll be right back," he promised. "Don't try to cross. Please." The mother bear made a soft grunting sound, then turned her attention back to her cubs and the approaching danger. The male bear was getting closer, moving with the confident swagger of a predator who knows his prey is trapped. Jacob ran. His boots slipped and slid on the muddy path as he raced back toward the cabin. The rain had intensified again, stinging his face and making it hard to see. His lungs burned with the effort, but he didn't slow down. Lives depended on his speed now. He burst through the cabin door, leaving muddy footprints on the floor his mother had just cleaned yesterday. The radio was on the shelf near his father's desk. Jacob grabbed it, his wet fingers fumbling with the dials. His father had shown him how to use it, but that had been months ago, a casual lesson he'd half paid attention to. Come on," he muttered, turning the radio on and adjusting the frequency to the emergency channel his father had marked with a piece of tape. Static filled the small cabin. Jacob pressed the talk button. "Hello? Is anyone there? This is Jacob Bennett. We have an emergency. More static, then a crackle, and finally a voice. This is Pine Ridge Ranger Station. Please identify your emergency. Relief flooded through Jacob. There's a mother bear separated from her cubs because of the river. She almost drowned, and I pulled her out with a rope. But now there's another bear coming, and I think he's going to hurt the cubs. There was a pause, then, Son, did you say you pulled a bear out of the river? Yes, with a rope, but that's not important right now. The cubs are in danger, and I need help getting them across the river to their mother. Another pause. Jacob could almost imagine the ranger's confused expression. Where are you, son? At my family's cabin. The blue one by Harper's Bend in the river. And where are your parents? They went to town for supplies. Please, there's no time. The male bear, he's getting closer to the cubs. The ranger's voice became more serious. Jacob, listen to me. Stay inside your cabin, lock the doors. Don't go near any bears, mother, cubs, or otherwise. I'm sending someone right away, but it will take at least 30 minutes for them to reach you. Do you understand? Stay inside. Jacob looked out the window toward the river. He couldn't see the bears from here, but he could imagine what was happening. 30 minutes would be too late. I understand, he lied. Please, hurry. He put the radio down and ran to his father's tool cabinet. If the Rangers wouldn't get here in time, he would have to try his original plan. He needed more rope, lots of it, and something heavy to throw. His father kept fishing weights in a small box. Jacob grabbed the heaviest ones he could find and a spool of strong fishing line. It wasn't rope, but maybe it would be enough to pull a rope across if he could get the line over first. Armed with these supplies and a second coil of rope he found hanging in the mudroom, Jacob raced back down to the river. The scene that greeted him made his heart sink. The male bear had reached the cubs and was circling them, cutting off their escape routes. The little ones were huddled together on a rock that jutted out into the water, crying pitifully. The mother was still on Jacob's side of the river, pacing frantically and roaring challenges at the male. There was no more time for careful planning. Jacob tied the fishing weights to the end of the fishing line and began to whirl it around his head like a lasso. The mother bear watched him curiously, but made no move to stop him. Please, work, Jacob whispered, then threw with all his might. The weights sailed across the river, carrying the thin line with them. By some miracle, or perhaps just good aim, they landed on the far bank, just beyond where the cubs were trapped. Yes, Jacob exclaimed, quickly tying the end of his second rope to the fishing line. Now came the hard part. Pull, he shouted to no one in particular, hoping somehow the cubs would understand, or that the mother bear would find a way to help. To his astonishment, the fishing line began to move. At first, he thought it was just the current catching it, but then he saw the smaller of the two cubs had grabbed the line in its mouth and was backing away from the river, pulling the line with it. That's it, Jacob encouraged. Keep going. The cub seemed to understand, continuing to pull until the end of the heavier rope reached the far bank. Jacob quickly tied his end to the same tree the first rope was secured to, creating a guide rope that spanned the river. But would it be enough? The rope sagged in the middle, dipping into the rushing water. It wasn't a bridge, not really, but maybe it could help guide the cubs across if they were brave enough to swim. The male bear had noticed the commotion now, and turned his attention toward the rope and the strange human activity on the far bank. He approached the rope cautiously, sniffing at it. The mother bear seized this moment of distraction. In a display of intelligence that Jacob could scarcely believe, she grabbed the original rescue rope in her teeth and began to pull. The rope, still partially looped around her upper body, went taut as she backed away from the river. She was using herself as a counterweight, pulling the guide rope higher above the water. Jacob quickly understood and added his own strength to the effort, pulling on his end of the guide rope to raise it further. Between them, they managed to lift the rope almost a foot above the raging current. Now came the moment of truth. Would the cubs understand what to do? And even if they did, would they be brave enough to try? The mother bear called to them, a special sound that seemed meant just for her young. The cubs responded immediately, their small faces turning toward the sound of their mother. The smaller one, the clever one who had pulled the rope across, was the first to move. It approached the water's edge cautiously, looking at the guide rope, and then at its mother across the river. The male bear was coming back now, having lost interest in the rope. He had realized the cubs were the easier target and was moving toward them with renewed purpose. The smaller cub made its decision. With a desperate cry, it leaped into the water, immediately grabbing the guide rope with its front paws. The current tried to pull it away, but the cub held tight, using the rope to pull itself along, paw over paw. Jacob held his breath, watching the tiny creature fight its way across. The mother bear called encouragement, never letting go of her end of the rope. Halfway across, the cub's strength began to fail. Its grip loosened, and for a heart-stopping moment Jacob thought it would be swept away. But then the cub found some final reserve of strength and continued on, its movements slower but still determined. On the far bank, the male bear had reached the second cub, which was now backing away in terror, trapped between the predator and the raging river. The mother bear saw this and let out a roar of pure fury. In a display of maternal strength that defied belief, she planted her feet and pulled on the rope with even greater force, lifting the guide rope higher out of the water to make the smaller cub's journey easier. Jacob did the same on his side, ignoring the burning in his arms and the rope cutting into his palms. Together, human and bear raised the guide rope almost 2 feet above the torrent. The smaller cub was almost across now, just a few more feet. With a final desperate lunge, it reached the bank where its mother waited. Immediately, the mother dropped the rope and rushed to her young one, nuzzling it to make sure it was unharmed. The guide rope splashed back into the water, now unsupported on the mother's side. But there was still one cub left on the far side, and the male bear was closing in. The mother bear looked across the river at her remaining young, then at Jacob, as if asking for his help one more time. Without the mother holding the rope on her side, the guide system wouldn't work for the second cub. Jacob tried to think of another solution, but nothing came to mind. The second cub was larger. It might be strong enough to swim across on its own, but with the current so strong, it seemed impossible. Then something entirely unexpected happened. The male bear, who had been stalking toward the remaining cub, suddenly stopped. He lifted his head, sniffing the air. Then, to Jacob's amazement, he turned and quickly disappeared into the trees. A moment later, Jacob understood why. The distant but distinctive sound of a helicopter cut through the rain and wind. The Rangers were coming, and they were coming by air instead of land, much faster than the 30 minutes they had promised. The remaining cub, sensing the male's departure, cautiously approached the water's edge. It looked at its mother and sibling on the opposite bank, gathering its courage. "Wait," Jacob called out, both to the cub and to its mother. "Help is coming." But the call of family was too strong. The second cub, seeing no other option, plunged into the river. Immediately the current caught it, pulling it downstream away from the crossing point. The mother bear cried out in alarm, rushing along the bank to follow her cub's progress. Jacob did the same on his side, keeping pace with the struggling young bear as it was swept downstream. "Swim!" Jacob shouted. "Swim to this side!" Whether by instinct or understanding, the cub fought against the current, angling itself toward Jacob's side of the river. But the water was too strong, the distance too great. It was losing ground, being pulled further into the middle of the raging torrent. The helicopter was closer now, the sound of its rotors drowning out even the roar of the river. Jacob looked up, waving his arms frantically to catch their attention. They needed to see the cub. To understand the emergency wasn't just about a boy and some bears, but about a life being lost before their eyes. The helicopter appeared above the tree line, its searchlight cutting through the rain. It hovered for a moment, then moved directly over the river, following the path of the struggling cub. Jacob continued to run alongside the river, keeping pace with the cub. He was so focused on the animal that he almost didn't notice when the ground beneath his feet suddenly gave way. The rain-soaked bank, weakened by the flood, collapsed under his weight. With a cry of surprise, Jacob tumbled down the muddy slope toward the raging water. He managed to grab a tree root at the last second, stopping his fall just inches from the current. But he was stuck now, clinging to the root with one hand while the rest of his body dangled precariously over the water. "Help!" he shouted, though he knew no one could hear him over the combined roar of the river and the helicopter. The cub was closer now, being swept directly toward him by the current. Without thinking, Jacob reached out with his free hand. It was a foolish move, one his father would have scolded him for. Never try to touch a wild animal, especially a frightened one. It could bite, scratch, or worse. But in that moment, Jacob wasn't thinking about safety. He was thinking about the desperate mother bear who had trusted him, about the clever cub who had pulled the rope across, and about this second cub who was fighting so hard to survive. As the cub was swept past his position, Jacob made a wild grab. His fingers tangled in the thick, wet fur of its neck, and he held on with all his might. The cub thrashed in surprise but didn't try to bite. Instead, it seemed to understand that this strange creature was trying to help. Now, Jacob was in an impossible position, hanging onto the tree root with one hand and the struggling cub with the other. His arms felt like they were being torn apart, and he knew he couldn't hold on much longer. That's when a spotlight from the helicopter found them, illuminating the boy and bear cub in a circle of bright light. The aircraft moved closer, hovering just above the trees. A figure appeared in the doorway, and something was lowered down on a cable, a rescue harness. It swung wildly in the wind, coming tantalizingly close before being blown away again. Jacob gritted his teeth, holding on to both the root and the cub as his strength rapidly faded. The harness came closer again, and this time Jacob managed to hook his foot through one of the straps. He pulled it toward him, somehow maneuvering it around both himself and the cub while still maintaining his grip on the tree root. Just as his fingers began to slip from the root, he felt the harness tighten around them. Then they were rising, lifted clear of the raging water. The cub squirmed against him but seemed too exhausted to put up much of a fight. As they were raised higher, Jacob could see the mother bear and the first cub watching from the bank. The mother stood on her hind legs, following their ascent with her eyes. There was something so human in her posture, in the worried tilt of her head, that Jacob felt tears mixing with the rain on his face. "It's okay," he called down to her, though he knew she couldn't possibly understand his words. "I've got your baby. I'll bring it back to you." The helicopter didn't try to carry them far. As soon as they were clear of the river, the pilot maneuvered toward an open area just up the hill from where the mother bear waited. Park rangers in bright yellow rain gear rushed forward as Jacob and the cub were lowered to the ground. "Son, are you all right?" one of them asked, helping to free Jacob from the harness while another ranger carefully examined the cub, which was now too tired to resist. "I'm fine," Jacob said, his voice hoarse from shouting over the storm. "But the cub, we need to get it back to its mother." The rangers exchanged glances. "That's not how we usually handle these situations," the first one said. "Typically, we'd take the cub to a wildlife center to be checked out, especially after being in that river." "No," Jacob protested. "You can't separate them. The mother saved my life, and I promised to save her cubs. Please." The ranger who was examining the cub looked up. "This little guy seems okay, exhausted and cold, but no obvious injuries, and Mom is right down there watching us." Sure enough, the mother bear had moved as close as she dared to the humans, the first cub following close behind her. She made no aggressive moves, but her eyes never left her second youngster. The lead ranger sighed, then nodded. "All right, we'll reunite them, but then we need to get you home, young man. Your parents called the station in a panic when they couldn't reach the cabin because of a downed power line. They're waiting for news." Jacob nodded, suddenly remembering that his adventure would certainly have consequences at home. But that was a worry for later. The rangers placed the exhausted cub in a small carrier and carefully made their way down the slope to a spot about 50 feet from where the mother bear waited. They set the carrier down, opened the door, and quickly backed away. For a long moment, nothing happened. The cub was too tired to move. Then the mother bear approached cautiously, her focus entirely on her young. With gentle movements that belied her size and strength, she nudged the cub with her nose. The little one stirred, recognized its mother, and struggled to its feet. The reunion that followed was something Jacob would never forget. The mother bear gathered both her cubs close, nuzzling them and making soft sounds of reassurance. The cubs pressed against her, finally safe after their ordeal. Before the rangers could lead Jacob away, the mother bear looked up. Her eyes found his across the distance that separated them. She didn't move toward him. Her priorities were clear now that she had her family back. But she held his gaze for a long moment, and Jacob could have sworn she nodded slightly before turning away. "Did you see that?" he asked the ranger beside him. "See what?" "She thanked me. I think she thanked me." The ranger smiled kindly. "Bears are remarkable animals, smarter than most people give them credit for. But come on now, we need to get you home and checked out by a doctor, just to be safe." As they led him toward the helicopter, Jacob looked back one last time. The bear family was already moving away, heading deeper into the forest, away from the river that had nearly claimed them and the humans who had intervened in their lives. But the mother stopped once more, turning to look back. In that final glance, Jacob felt a connection that transcended the natural boundaries between their species. Not friendship. They were still wild animals and he a human child, but a moment of mutual respect and understanding. Then they were gone, disappearing into the trees as if they had never been there at all. Jacob allowed himself to be guided into the helicopter, his body suddenly aware of every scrape, bruise, and aching muscle from his ordeal. As they lifted off, he could see his family's cabin in the distance, and, beyond it, the lights of his parents' car making its way up the muddy road. He knew he would be in trouble. He knew there would be consequences for disobeying, for putting himself in danger. But he also knew that what he had done today mattered, that 3 lives had been saved because he had been brave enough, or foolish enough, to help. And as the helicopter carried him home through the rain, Jacob Bennett smiled to himself. Some stories, he thought, would be worth whatever punishment came after them. Some moments were worth remembering forever. This was one of them. The helicopter landed in a clearing near the cabin just as Jacob's parents' car pulled up. They rushed out into the rain, their faces masks of worry and fear. When they saw Jacob emerging from the helicopter, supported by a park ranger, their expressions transformed into relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. "Jacob!" his mother cried, running to him and dropping to her knees in the mud to embrace him. "We were so worried. The rangers radioed us that you were safe, but they didn't tell us. They didn't say—" Her voice broke as she pulled back to examine him, her hands moving quickly over his face, arms, and chest, as if to confirm that all parts of him were still there and intact. His father joined them, his face stern but his eyes suspiciously bright. "Son, what happened?" "We told you to stay inside." Before Jacob could answer, the lead ranger stepped forward. "Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, your son has had quite an adventure today, and I have to say, in 20 years as a park ranger, I've never seen anything like it." Inside the cabin, wrapped in a warm blanket with a cup of hot chocolate in his hands, Jacob told his story. He tried to stick to the facts, to explain why he had needed to help, why he couldn't just wait for someone else to solve the problem. As he spoke, the ranger occasionally nodded or added details from what they had witnessed after arriving. His parents listened in stunned silence, their expressions shifting between disbelief, horror, and amazement. When he described throwing the rope to the mother bear, his mother gasped and grabbed his father's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Jacob," his father said when he had finished, "what you did was incredibly dangerous. Bears are wild animals. They're unpredictable, and they're powerful enough to kill a grown man with one swipe, let alone a 9-year-old boy." "I know, Dad," Jacob said quietly. But she needed help. Her cubs needed help. "You could have died," his mother said, her voice breaking. "Do you understand that? You could have been swept away in that river, or attacked by the bears, or fallen from that helicopter harness. We could have lost you today." Jacob looked down at his hot chocolate. "I'm sorry I scared you, but I'm not sorry I helped them." His father sighed deeply, running a hand over his face. "The thing is, son, what you did was also incredibly brave. Foolish, yes, but brave in a way that—" He looked at the ranger. "In a way that most adults wouldn't have been." The ranger nodded. "It's true. Most people, even experienced wildlife handlers, would have called for help and stayed far away from those bears. What your son did was against every protocol we teach about wildlife interaction." He paused, then added, "But if he hadn't done it, we would have found 3 dead bears when we arrived. Instead, we found a family reunited, thanks to your son." Jacob's mother wiped tears from her eyes. "I don't know whether to ground you for a month or put his story in the local paper," his father finished for her. "Because this is going to be one hell of a story, Jacob. People aren't going to believe it." "Some already don't," the ranger said with a small smile. "My colleagues at the station think I'm embellishing. A boy using ropes to rescue a mother bear and her cubs? Sounds like a tall tale. But it's not," Jacob said firmly. "It happened. She looked at me, and she knew I was trying to help. She knew." The 3 adults exchanged glances, but none of them contradicted him. Whether they believed in the connection Jacob had felt with the mother bear or not, they couldn't deny the outcome. 3 bears alive that should have been dead. "Well," his father said finally, "punishment can wait until tomorrow. Right now, I think you need a hot bath, some dinner, and then bed. You look about ready to collapse." Jacob nodded, suddenly aware of just how exhausted he was. Every muscle in his body ached, and now that the adrenaline had worn off, he could feel the sting of numerous cuts and scrapes he hadn't even noticed getting. As his mother led him toward the bathroom, the ranger called after them. Just so you know, we'll be monitoring that bear family for the next few days, making sure Mom's leg wound doesn't get infected, and that the cubs are recovering well from their ordeal. If you want, I can keep you updated on how they're doing." Jacob turned back, his eyes lighting up despite his exhaustion. "Yes, please. I'd like that." Later, lying in bed after the ranger had left and his parents had finally stopped fussing over him, Jacob stared out his window at the stars that had appeared now that the storm had passed. The river would still be high for days, but at least the rain had stopped. He wondered where the bears were now. Had they found a safe, dry place to rest? Was the mother's wound painful? Would the cubs have nightmares about the river, the way he sometimes had nightmares about getting lost in the woods? As sleep began to claim him, Jacob made a decision. Tomorrow, he would ask his father to teach him more about wildlife, about bears especially. He wanted to understand them better, to learn how they lived and what they needed. Maybe someday he could work with animals himself, helping them in ways that didn't involve dangerous river rescues. His last thought before drifting off was of the mother bear's eyes, that moment of connection when she had looked at him, and he had looked at her, and something unspoken had passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, that despite their differences, despite the natural boundaries that separated their worlds, they had shared something profound today. They had saved each other. 3 days later, Jacob stood at the edge of their property, looking out into the forest. The ranger, whose name he had learned was Ranger Mike, had called that morning with an update. The bear family had been spotted about 2 miles upriver, near a sheltered cave system that offered protection from the elements. The mother's wound didn't appear to be infected, and both cubs were active and seemingly recovered from their ordeal. "That's good news," Jacob had said, relief evident in his voice. "It is," Ranger Mike agreed. "But there's something else. We've been tracking the male bear, too, the one that was threatening the cubs. He's still in the area, and he seems to be following the mother and cubs. This isn't typical behavior. Usually male bears don't show much interest in cubs unless they're planning to kill them." A chill had run down Jacob's spine at those words. "So they're still in danger?" "Possibly. We're keeping an eye on the situation. I just thought you'd want to know, given your investment in their welfare." After the call, Jacob couldn't settle. His parents had grounded him for a week for disobeying their instructions to stay inside during the storm, but they'd been surprisingly lenient otherwise. His father had even praised his quick thinking and bravery, though not without adding several warnings about the dangers of approaching wild animals. Now, standing at the forest's edge with the afternoon sun warming his back, Jacob felt a strange restlessness. The bears were safe for now, but for how long, and why was the male bear still tracking them? A flash of movement in the trees caught his attention. Jacob froze, his heart speeding up. Was it a deer, a trick of the light, or something else? Then he saw it. A dark shape moving between the pines about 50 yards in. It was too large to be anything but a bear. Jacob took a cautious step backward, remembering his father's warnings. He was about to turn and run back to the cabin when the bear emerged into a patch of sunlight, and he recognized her immediately. It was the mother bear. She stood on all fours, her massive head swinging slowly from side to side as if scanning the area. Her injured leg appeared to be healing. She wasn't limping as badly as she had been during the rescue. Behind her, the 2 cubs tumbled out of the underbrush, playing some kind of game that involved nipping at each other's ears. Jacob held perfectly still, afraid that any movement might startle them. He was just at the edge of the cleared area around the cabin. If the bears came much closer, his parents would see them from the windows and might call the rangers or, worse, try to scare them away. The mother bear stopped, lifting her nose to test the air. Then, with a directness that sent shivers down Jacob's spine, she looked straight at him. For a moment, neither moved. The forest seemed to hold its breath as boy and bear regarded each other across the distance that separated them. The cubs, sensing their mother's sudden alertness, stopped playing and pressed close to her sides. Then, in a gesture that Jacob could only interpret as deliberate, the mother bear rose onto her hind legs. Standing upright, she was even more impressive. A tower of muscle and fur that could destroy him with a single blow. But there was no aggression in her posture. Instead, she simply stood, watching him, as if making sure he could see her clearly and recognize her. Jacob raised his hand in a small wave, feeling both foolish and awestruck. "Hello again," he said softly. The mother bear remained upright for a few more seconds, then dropped back to all fours. With a grunt to her cubs, she turned and began to move deeper into the forest. The little ones followed, though the smaller cub, the clever one who had pulled the rope, looked back once at Jacob before disappearing into the shadowy green world of the pines. Jacob stood motionless for several minutes after they had gone, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had the mother bear sought him out deliberately? Was it just coincidence that they had crossed paths again? Or was there something else happening here, something beyond his understanding? He was still pondering these questions when his mother called him from the cabin. "Jacob, lunch is ready." With one last look at the spot where the bears had vanished, Jacob turned and jogged back to the cabin. He decided not to mention the encounter to his parents. They were already worried enough about his fascination with the bears. Seeing him wave at a mother bear might push them over the edge into full-blown panic. The next morning, Jacob woke early. The sun was just beginning to illuminate the eastern sky, painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold. His parents were still asleep, his father's deep snores echoing down the hallway from their bedroom. Moving quietly, Jacob slipped out of bed and dressed warmly. The river had continued to recede over the past few days, but the mornings were still cool, especially this early. He wasn't planning to disobey his parents again. Not so soon after the rescue incident, but his grounding technically only applied to leaving the property, and he figured the porch didn't count as leaving. He just wanted some fresh air and time to think. As he stepped onto the wooden porch, a sound from the edge of the forest made him stop. It was a soft, huffing noise, followed by the crack of a branch breaking under significant weight. Jacob's heart jumped into his throat. He knew before he even looked what he would find. The mother bear stood at the tree line, regarding the cabin with what seemed like cautious interest. Her cubs were nowhere to be seen this time, which struck Jacob as odd. Mother bears almost never left their cubs voluntarily. "Where are your little ones?" Jacob whispered, keeping his voice low to avoid waking his parents. As if in response, the mother bear took a step forward, then another. She was moving slowly, deliberately, her eyes never leaving Jacob. There was purpose in her movements. She wasn't just wandering by, she was approaching the cabin intentionally. Jacob should have been afraid. Everything he had been taught about wild animals told him to go inside, to close the door, to call for help. But he wasn't afraid. Something deeper than rational thought kept him rooted to the porch steps, watching as the massive predator made her way across the clearing toward him. When she was about 20 feet away, she stopped. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Then, with a movement so unexpected it made Jacob gasp, she lowered her head and pawed at the ground, as if pointing at something. Curiosity overcame caution, and Jacob took a few steps forward. "What is it? What are you trying to show me?" The bear looked up, then turned and took a few steps back toward the forest before stopping and looking over her shoulder at him. The message was unmistakable. "Follow me." Jacob hesitated, torn between his instinct to trust this strange connection they seemed to share and the very reasonable voice in his head that sounded a lot like his father's saying, "Are you out of your mind? It's a wild bear." But the mother bear waited patiently, her eyes holding his with that same intelligent awareness he had seen during the rescue. And Jacob found himself making a decision that would change everything. "Let me grab my boots," he said quietly, as if she could understand him. He rushed back inside, pulled on his hiking boots, and scribbled a quick note to his parents. "Gone for a short walk around the property. Back soon. Jay." It wasn't technically a lie. The property extended to the tree line. What happened after that? Well, he'd deal with the consequences later. When he stepped back outside, the mother bear was still waiting. As soon as she saw him, she turned and began walking toward the forest, her pace slow and measured, as if to ensure he could keep up. "I must be crazy," Jacob muttered to himself as he followed her across the clearing and into the shadow of the pines. Once among the trees, the bear picked up her pace slightly. She seemed to be following a specific path, winding between the massive tree trunks with the confidence of one who knows exactly where she's going. Jacob stayed about 15 feet behind her, close enough to keep her in sight, but far enough that he could retreat quickly if necessary. They walked for nearly 20 minutes, moving deeper into the forest than Jacob had ever ventured alone. The trees grew thicker here, the underbrush more dense. If not for the bear clearing a path ahead of him, Jacob would have found it difficult to navigate. Finally, they reached a small clearing. The mother bear stopped at its edge, turning to make sure Jacob was still following. Then she moved forward into the open space, and Jacob saw what she had brought him to see. In the center of the clearing, curled up in a hollow between the roots of a massive oak tree, were her cubs. But something was wrong. The smaller cub, the clever one, was lying on its side, its small body shaking with what looked like fever. The larger cub sat beside its sibling, occasionally nudging it with its nose, as if trying to rouse it to play. The mother bear approached her cubs, making soft grunting sounds. The healthy cub immediately ran to her, pressing against her leg, but the smaller one barely responded, just lifting its head slightly before letting it fall back to the ground. Jacob approached cautiously, his heart sinking as he realized what was happening. The little cub was sick, perhaps from its time in the cold river, or from an injury sustained during the ordeal that they hadn't noticed. "Is this why you brought me here?" he asked the mother bear, who was now sitting beside her ailing young one, gently licking its fur. She looked up at him, and in her eyes Jacob saw something that transcended the barrier between their species: desperation, hope, trust. She had brought him here because she needed help, and for some reason Jacob couldn't fully understand, she had chosen to trust him. Jacob knelt down, still keeping a respectful distance. The sick cub's breathing was rapid and shallow, its small sides heaving with the effort. Even to Jacob's untrained eye, it was clear the little bear was in serious trouble. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, speaking as much to himself as to the mother bear. "I'm not a vet. I don't know how to help." The mother bear made a soft sound, almost like a whimper. It was so unbear-like, so vulnerable, that Jacob felt tears spring to his eyes. This powerful wild creature, capable of killing him with a single blow, was asking for his help in the only way she knew how. "Okay," he said, making a decision. "I'll get help, I promise. But you need to stay here with them." He stood up slowly, backing away from the family. The mother bear watched him, making no move to follow or to stop him. There was an understanding between them now, a pact made without words. Jacob turned and began to run, retracing their path through the forest as best he could. It was harder without the bear leading the way, but he managed to find the main game trail they had followed and stuck to it. By the time he burst out of the tree line near his family's cabin, the sun was fully up, and his parents were standing on the porch looking worried. "Jacob," his mother cried when she saw him, "where have you been?" "Your note said just around the property, but we've been calling for you for 20 minutes. "No time to explain," Jacob gasped, out of breath from running. "I need the phone. I need to call Ranger Mike." His father's expression darkened. "Son, if this is about those bears again—" "It is. The cub is sick, really sick. The mother brought me to him. She showed me where they were because she needs help." His parents exchanged concerned glances. "Jacob," his mother said gently, "bears don't bring people to their cubs. That's not how wild animals behave." "This one did," Jacob insisted. "Please, you have to believe me. If we don't help, the cub is going to die." Perhaps it was the desperation in his voice, or maybe his parents had simply learned from the rescue incident that their son's connection with the bear family was something beyond their understanding. Whatever the reason, his father sighed and went inside to get the phone. 20 minutes later, Ranger Mike's truck pulled up outside the cabin. He had brought a wildlife veterinarian with him, a stern-looking woman named Doctor Chen, who carried a large medical bag and regarded Jacob with skeptical eyes. "So," she said after Jacob had explained the situation, "you're telling me a mother bear led you to her sick cub, like Lassie leading someone to a well? You understand how that sounds, right?" "I know it sounds crazy," Jacob admitted, "but it's true. And right now, that cub needs help. Please, I can show you where they are." Dr. Chen looked at Ranger Mike, who shrugged. "This is the same kid who rescued the bear family from the river. If anyone's earned the benefit of the doubt when it comes to unlikely bear stories, it's him." After some discussion, it was agreed that Jacob would lead Ranger Mike and Dr. Chen to the clearing. His parents would stay behind, partly because too many people might frighten the bears, and partly because Jacob's mother looked like she might faint at the idea of her son approaching a wild bear again, even with trained professionals present. "We'll be careful," Ranger Mike assured Jacob's parents. "And we'll have tranquilizer guns if necessary. But if there's any sign of aggression from the mother, we're getting your son out of there immediately. Understood?" Jacob's father nodded grimly. "You bring him back safe, or I'm holding you personally responsible." The hike back to the clearing took longer than Jacob's original journey with the bear. They had to move more cautiously, and Jacob found that some of the landmarks he'd noted looked different from this direction. But eventually, they approached the edge of the small open space where he had left the bear family. "Wait," Ranger Mike whispered, putting a hand on Jacob's shoulder. "Let me check it out first." He raised a pair of binoculars to his eyes, scanning the clearing carefully. "I see them," he confirmed. "The mother and 2 cubs, just like you said. One of the cubs does look distressed." Dr. Chen took the binoculars next, studying the scene with professional detachment. "The cub is showing signs of respiratory distress. Could be pneumonia from the river incident or an infection from an injury we can't see from here. Either way, it needs treatment." "So, how do we approach?" Jacob asked. "The mother won't hurt us. I know she won't, but she might get scared if too many strangers come at once." Dr. Chen and Ranger Mike exchanged glances. "Normally, we'd tranquilize the mother first," the ranger admitted. "It's standard procedure when treating cubs in the wild. The mother bears are just too unpredictable and dangerous otherwise." "No," Jacob protested. "You can't do that. She trusts me. She asked for help. If you shoot her, you'll break that trust forever." "Jacob," Dr. Chen said firmly, "I understand you feel a connection with this bear, but she's still a wild animal. 300 pounds of muscle and claws, and protective maternal instinct. My job is to help the cub, but I can't do that if I'm worried about being mauled. Jacob thought quickly. What if I go first? What if I show her that you're with me, that you're here to help? The adults clearly didn't like this idea, but after a brief consultation they reluctantly agreed to try it, with conditions. Ranger Mike would keep his tranquilizer gun ready, and at the first sign of aggression from the mother bear, they would retreat and come up with a different plan. I still think this is a bad idea, Dr. Chen muttered as they prepared to enter the clearing. But I've never seen a cub treated without sedating the mother first. If we can pull this off, it would be groundbreaking. Jacob led the way, his heart pounding so hard he was sure the bears would hear it before they saw him. As they reached the edge of the clearing, he called out softly, "It's me. I'm back. I brought help for your cub." The mother bear, who had been lying beside her sick young one, raised her massive head. She stared at the three humans, her nostrils flaring as she took in their scents. The healthy cub pressed closer to her side, watching with curious eyes. "It's okay," Jacob continued, taking a slow step forward. "They're going to help. Like I helped you in the river, remember?" For a tense moment, no one moved. Dr. Chen had her medical bag clutched tightly in both hands, and Ranger Mike's finger hovered near the trigger of his tranquilizer gun. The mother bear's eyes moved from Jacob to the strangers, then back again, as if assessing the situation. Then, with a deliberateness that took everyone's breath away, she did something extraordinary. She rose to her feet, nudged her healthy cub toward a fallen log at the edge of the clearing, and then returned to stand over her sick baby. Slowly, she backed away, just a few feet, but enough to create a space between herself and the ailing cub. She was granting them access. "I don't believe what I'm seeing," Dr. Chen whispered. "Believe it," Jacob said with quiet confidence. "She understands." With cautious movements, they approached the sick cub, which was now breathing even more rapidly than before, its small body shivering despite the warm day. The mother bear watched their every move, muscles tense but making no aggressive gestures. Dr. Chen knelt beside the cub and began her examination, speaking in a calm, even voice as she worked. Elevated temperature, congested lungs, possible infection. This little one is very sick, but I think we can help. She opened her medical bag and prepared several injections, antibiotics, anti-inflammatories, fluids for dehydration. Each time she used a needle, she showed it to the mother bear first, as if asking permission. "That's good," Ranger Mike said quietly. "Keep including her in the process. Let her see that you're helping, not hurting." The treatment took nearly an hour. Throughout it all, the mother bear remained calm, watching with an intelligence that defied everything Jacob had been taught about wild animals. Once, when the cub cried out in pain after an injection, she took a step forward but stopped when Jacob raised his hand and spoke softly to her. "It's okay, it hurts, but it's helping, I promise." When Dr. Chen had finished, she packed up her supplies and stood slowly. "I've done what I can for now. The cub needs more treatment, and ideally should be monitored for the next few days. In a normal situation, we'd take it to a wildlife rehabilitation center." "We can't separate them," Jacob said immediately. "The mother would never understand. She'd think we betrayed her." Dr. Chen sighed. "I know this is unusual, but I tend to agree. This mother-cub bond is exceptionally strong, and the mother's behavior is so atypical that I'm reluctant to follow standard procedures." She looked at Ranger Mike. "What if we set up a temporary monitoring station nearby? We could check on the cub daily, continue the antibiotic treatments without removing it from its mother." Ranger Mike nodded slowly. "It could work. We'd need approval from the Park Service, but given the unique circumstances, I think they'd agree. They were discussing the logistics when a sound from the edge of the clearing made them all turn. A deep, rumbling growl that was definitely not coming from the mother bear. The male bear, the one that had threatened the cubs at the river, stood at the tree line. He was even larger than the mother, his fur darker, his posture aggressive. He took a step into the clearing, teeth bared. The mother bear immediately placed herself between the male and her cubs, her own teeth showing in a silent snarl. But she was still weakened from her river ordeal and had an injured leg. The male had the advantage in size and strength. "Back away slowly," Ranger Mike instructed, raising his tranquilizer gun. "Get back to the trees. I'll try to dart him." But before he could take aim, the male charged, not at them, but at the mother bear. The two massive animals collided with a force that seemed to shake the ground. Teeth and claws flashed as they fought, their roars echoing through the forest. "Run!" Dr. Chen shouted, grabbing Jacob's arm. But Jacob couldn't move. The healthy cub was still by the fallen log, now crying out in fear as its mother fought for her life just feet away. The sick cub lay helpless where they had been treating it, too weak to move. "The cubs," Jacob said, pulling away from Dr. Chen. "We can't leave the cubs." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The male bear, stronger and more aggressive, gained the upper hand in the fight. He pinned the mother bear to the ground, his teeth aiming for her throat in what would surely be a killing blow. Without thinking, Jacob picked up a fallen branch and ran forward, shouting at the top of his lungs, "Hey, over here!" The male bear froze, his head whipping around to face this new threat. Distracted, he loosened his grip on the mother bear, who immediately scrambled away and placed herself once again between the male and her cubs. "Jacob, no!" Ranger Mike shouted. But it was too late. The male bear was already charging toward the boy, covering the distance between them with terrifying speed. Jacob stood his ground, branch raised, even as his mind screamed at him to run. But he knew he couldn't outrun a bear. His only hope was that Ranger Mike would have time to use the tranquilizer gun. 10 feet, 5 feet. The male bear was almost upon him, and Jacob could smell its hot breath, see the fury in its small eyes. Then, something brown and powerful slammed into the male from the side. The mother bear had launched herself at her adversary with the last of her strength, knocking him off course just before he reached Jacob. The two bears rolled across the clearing in a tangle of fur and claws. Ranger Mike raised his gun, trying to get a clear shot at the male, but they were moving too fast, too chaotically. "Get the cubs!" Jacob shouted to Dr. Chen. "Get them to safety." The veterinarian didn't hesitate. She ran to the sick cub, scooping it up in her arms while Jacob dashed to the fallen log and coaxed the frightened, healthy cub out of hiding. Together, they retreated to the edge of the clearing where Ranger Mike stood with his tranquilizer gun still raised. The fight between the bears was brutal and swift. Despite her courage, the mother bear was outmatched. The male pinned her again, and this time there would be no distraction to save her. "Take the shot," Jacob pleaded with Ranger Mike. "Please." The ranger squeezed the trigger. The dart flew true, striking the male bear in his massive shoulder. But tranquilizers don't work instantly. It would take minutes for the drug to take effect, and by then it might be too late for the mother bear. Jacob looked down at the frightened cub pressing against his leg, then at the sick one in Dr. Chen's arms. These little ones had almost died once already in the river. He couldn't let them lose their mother now, not after everything they had been through together. In that moment, Jacob made a decision that his parents would later call the bravest and most foolish thing anyone had ever done. He reached down and picked up a handful of small rocks. "What are you doing?" Dr. Chen asked, alarmed. "Buying time," Jacob replied, and before anyone could stop him, He threw the rocks at the male bear, hitting him squarely on his back. The bear whirled, momentarily releasing the mother. His eyes locked onto Jacob, and with a roar that seemed to shake the trees, he charged once more. "Run, Jacob," Ranger Mike shouted, fumbling to reload the tranquilizer gun. "Run!" But Jacob didn't run. Instead, he stood perfectly still and raised his hand, palm out, exactly as he had done when calming the mother bear during her rescue from the river. "Stop," he said, in a voice that sounded much calmer than he felt. And miraculously, incomprehensibly, the male bear did stop. Just 10 feet away, he skidded to a halt, confusion replacing rage in his small eyes. Perhaps it was the tranquilizer beginning to take effect, or perhaps it was something in Jacob's stance or scent that gave the bear pause. Whatever the reason, the moment stretched out, human and bear locked in a silent standoff. Then the mother bear was moving again, limping badly but determined. She positioned herself between Jacob and the male, her message clear. To get to the boy, he would have to go through her first. The male bear swayed slightly on his feet, the tranquilizer now beginning to affect his balance. He looked from the mother to Jacob and back again, as if trying to make sense of this strange alliance. Then, with a grunt that might have been confusion or surrender, he turned and lumbered back toward the trees. He made it about halfway before the tranquilizer took full effect. His steps became uncertain, then his legs buckled, and he collapsed to the ground, unconscious but still breathing. For a moment, no one moved. The clearing was silent except for the ragged breathing of the mother bear and the soft whimpering of the cubs. Then Jacob slowly approached the mother, his hand still raised. "Thank you," he said softly. "You saved my life." Again. The mother bear regarded him with those intelligent eyes, then turned her attention to her cubs. She limped over to where Dr. Chen still held the sick one, making soft grunting sounds in her throat. "I think she wants her baby back," Jacob said. Dr. Chen nodded and carefully set the cub down. Immediately, the mother began to check it over, sniffing and gently nudging it with her nose. The healthy cub bounded over to join them, and for a moment they were just a family again. Wounded, frightened, but together.